you're not good enough to do that, or you're not pretty enough. If we feel that we have that within us, which I would say 95% of us do, how do we work through that? How do we get rid of that?
I think firstly we have to understand the only thing that we really used to fight about was money. And then I remember just stopping and thinking, this is not going anywhere good. And I just looked at him and I asked him the question.
It's harder to be happier and let go of these, emotional bonds that we have with people that aren't serving us. So it's easier to sit sometimes in the negativity.
Yeah, totally.
When is the point where you stop controlling so much and give your kids freedom?
What we want to be doing, and I think this is what is really good motivation for people to change, is to be like,
Lael, how are you, my dear friend? Welcome back.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
And you've got your new book. We were just talking about it before we turn the mics on. Own Your Own Story. We were comparing wonderful book stories together. How's the process been for you?
The actual process of writing a book, the kind of getting it on the paper was not hard because it's work that I've known for a really, really long time. So it was just a beautiful kind of brain dump of here's all the information. I think it's the bits and pieces after that I've found challenging because I often see myself more as a speaker than a writer. So the writing process, coming back with edits, all that kind of stuff, I felt challenging. I'm one of those type of people that I've got an idea, here we go, do it. I'm not so good on the details. So it was kind of kept feeling like I was doing a year 8 essay, English essay, where I kept getting critiques back of things I needed to change. So I found it challenging, but I'm also so happy that it's here and out in the world now.
And it's an interesting thing, writing a book, and it relates to actually the content of your book, where there are highs and lows on the journey, right? And there are times, even through the publicity loop that you do, where you will be rejected. Something you might want to go on might not write back or whatever it is. And there are highs because something you never thought of comes through because they love your work. So it very much is a reflection on any fears or negative kind of stories that we are playing with within ourselves. They kind of come right to the front, right?
Yeah.
More so, I feel like, than ever before in your life.
Yeah.
How have you found that?
Well, I think for me, I had to live what I was talking about in the book. And a lot of what I talk about in the book is the parts of our past that come up and, that are there in front of us. And so teenage me surfaced a lot in this book writing process because I kept feeling like, maybe my words aren't great. Are people going to understand what I'm really talking about? You're exactly right. It brings up all your doubts. Are people going to like this? Are they going to enjoy what you're doing? And then when you actually put it out there, when it was released last week, on the day it was released, I was like, okay, this is amazing. And then I was like, oh my God, I just want to go and hide. I just want to get into bed, put the doona over my head. Because there is a real thing about putting yourself out there, isn't there? When you create anything, whether it's a song, a book, a piece of art, when you're putting yourself out there and saying, hey, here's what I think and this is what I feel, you have to be vulnerable. You open yourself up to what people think, whether they like it, whether they don't. And I think for many artists or people who write, you have to reach a point where you just go, it doesn't matter what anyone else thinks. I've written this for me, what I believe. I'm just putting it here. And then where it goes, it goes. And so I eventually got to that point. So now I feel really good. I'm like, yeah, amazing. If people love it, that's awesome. If they don't, it's okay. But the process that I find interesting is that we are so much more comfortable in the struggle than we are in allowing the kind of joy and the success and stuff to come in as well. I think we're much more comfortable sitting in the hiding than we are in the being seen a lot of the time.
Absolutely. And sometimes I think it's like, any muscle, once we start using it more and more, the more comfortable we get, right? It was funny, last night I was asked to do the judging for my kids' school where they went and did public speaking. Yeah. And as a keynote speaker, they were like, can you come and be one of the people on the panel? And I thought, God, these kids who are in year 5 and year 6, unbelievable. But and it made me reflect on my own life where years ago, the first time I went and did a speech, my hands were shaking so bad and I was holding paper because I couldn't learn it off by heart. I wasn't at that stage yet. And I remember thinking, oh my God, everyone can probably see me shaking because the paper's shaking. Stop my hands from shaking. I'll have to hide it behind the podium, right? But the more I do it, the better I get at it. The more the nerves fade away because I'm used to doing it. however many years ago when I was shaking, I would never have thought that I could get to where I am now.
Yeah.
It's such a funny thing,
Yeah.
that when we first do something, it feels so scary, but then the more we do it, the easier it becomes.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's something that we tell kids all the time, don't we? We're like, give it a go, just try. But as adults, we don't do that as much. And I think we get out of practice and we like to stay in our little comfort zone, even if it doesn't serve us. We're much more comfortable with stuff that we know as opposed to the unknown. And I think when you do anything remotely creative or you have to put yourself out there, we are going to go back into those places of just, what if I'm exposed? What if people laugh at me? What if it doesn't go well? But I have such a theory that you win just by saying yes anyway. It doesn't matter how it goes. The fact that you're brave enough to get up there, do it, you will learn something no matter what.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's been it's been a very beautiful thing that I've carried through most of my life of just jumping in and going, yeah, I'm going to give it a crack. Doesn't matter what happens. We'll give it a go. I'm going to learn something. And it's a bit of a mantra of mine of just like, do it anyway. Let's just
I
see what
love
happens.
that. It's beautiful. In your book, you talk a lot about, as we said, owning your own stories and wounds from your past, especially your childhood. One of the most common that, I talk about a lot and I've heard you speak about is that you feel like you're not enough, right? And when rejection comes into play, that maybe we didn't get the job opportunity you want. It could even be in a partner situation or an opportunity that fell through. You feel like I'm not enough. And it's an interesting thing when you're really sitting in that feeling. It's like they say that everywhere you look, you will find signs that that's true, right? Oh, but then I remember a year ago when that similar thing happened to me or whatever it was, you can just, you're looping all these things in to try and show you, see, I'm right. I am not enough.
Yes.
And then you get into this really negative kind of mindset. These are stories from our youth, right? These are stories where someone said to us in the playground, you're not good enough to do that, or you're not pretty enough to, get that commercial that you wanted to get, whatever it is. If we feel that we have that within us, which I would say 95% of us do, how do we work through that? How do we get rid of that?
It's such a good question. I think the thing is, I always come back to this, that we have this like blueprint that we take on board as children. And I refer to them in the book as imprints. So we have imprints on everything. And what you're talking about there is we often have this imprint that locks into us that says, I am lovable when ... So for most adults I work with, because we grew up in this behaviorism paradigm, which we were really taught, you're lovable when you're good, when you're compliant, when you're doing the things that society says you should do, when you get good grades, when you look great, all that kind of stuff. And then when you get angry or you get upset or things don't go the way you want or you have all these other experiences, we're often told that we're bad or we're wrong. And, people turn away from us or we get excluded. So we have learned as a culture, and I think at this time, that we are only lovable when we are approved of, right? Which is the enoughness. I'm enough when I tick all these boxes. And that's a huge imprint that most of us have to undo, because I think because we grew up in that environment as children, and that's the message that was reiterated to us through our family of origin, through schooling, through society, it's pretty deeply embedded in a lot of us, right? And that's why we don't often take risks. It's why we don't often speak up, because our innate fear is around, am I going to be excluded? Like, are people going to approve of me if I'm enough here? So when we come back to how we shift that enoughness, I think firstly we have to understand the messaging that we receive, so we can see what society has said, but I think we can also then see, in my family of origin, the messages that I received from my parents were, you're lovable when you get A's, right, on your school reports, or, when you achieve well in sport, we're all sitting there applauding you, and then when you don't, maybe we say you didn't play well, and sometimes it's very subtle, the messages that we get around that. So then I think from those imprints and stories we take on, we reach adulthood, and then, they're the things that actually lead, exactly as you say, we actually look for evidence often because we're looking through that lens of, am I enough? And so because, again, we love to stay with what's familiar, we keep looking for more and more evidence that, see, that person didn't call me back, so maybe maybe they don't like me. And, we keep looking for all those things. So part of, I think, shifting and changing these imprints is actually firstly starting with, well, let's come back to the baseline of what do I want it to feel like? What do I want to say in this? So instead of an imprint that says something like, you're only worthy if you're achieving, we can change that to, even when I am resting and not doing anything, my enoughness is still innate. Or just anything that is basically around, I am enough just because I'm human, because that's actually the truth, right? We are all enough, simply because we're just here in a body. So I think the thing is when we can start firstly by going, this is what I want this imprint to be. And then we have to start looking for evidence that that's actually true, so that we change the focus of our lens. We look at that, even when we're not earning all the money or achieving, we might just have this sense of calm or knowing within ourselves that we're like, hey, this isn't about achieving in order to be seen. I am enough just purely because I am here. Or maybe it's just, the love that we feel with our partners or with our children, or it's being in nature and seeing a sunset or anything where we actually tap into that enoughness and just the beauty of being human is really what fuels us. So I think as we begin to shift some of these imprints by understanding where they've come from and then looking towards what we want it to look like or feel like, we begin to shift the needle a little bit. But for me, my biggest thing that I often say to people is we have to firstly understand where we've come from. And I think that's why I talk about owning your story in the book. Is our stories are there and we can't change them. But what we can do is we can work with what doesn't serve us anymore. We will all have imprints that are beautiful and amazing. We might have grown up in a family that really valued nature and taking care of the planet, and that's something that we took on board, and we're like, that's something that fuels us now. Perhaps we grew up in an environment where our family of origin loved getting together, sharing a meal. It was a sense of celebration, and that's kind of taken into our soul as, food is a beautiful thing. We get together, and that's a beautiful imprint that we carry forward. Maybe we have a family of origin that loved helping others and gave to charity and were of service, and that is something that is taken on board for us of being a good human. So we have this beautiful array of wonderful imprints that we take on board, and then we often have the subtle, more unconscious ones that often run our lives and usually depict how we end up interacting with other humans. And they can be things like, again, I'm only lovable if I look a certain way or I earn a certain amount of money. Relationships are meant to be full of passion and turmoil, if that's what you watched growing up in your family of origin, where your parents yelled at each other and you're like, oh, okay, that's what love and relationship looks like. And so then you grow up and you find a relationship where you end up yelling and at each other, and your partner's like, what are you doing? And you're like, but this is how we experience love, right? Because this is what was modeled to me. So we have imprints that are often subtle and often things that we don't even realize are what run and fuel us. And then we often bump up against them in life. And then I think the key is often to ask, why does this keep happening? Or why is this not feeling good? So much around that enoughness, when we come back to that, when we do new things and we don't feel fulfilled, or perhaps when we are, scared to put ourselves out there, when we dig a bit deeper, we see that, the core wound or the fear comes from this place back here. And for me, the beautiful thing about this is these are often just stories that we've told ourselves. They are things that we believe to be true. A lot of the time they aren't even true. They're our perception at the time. And the magic of it is that we can actually shift and change it.
It's so true. You talk about your mum in the book. You adore your mum. She was sitting in front of me at your book launch. She's like so sweet. You just look at her and you go, you're a nice person.
Yeah.
And you can just sense that from someone. And I sense that from her.
Yeah.
I feel like you grew up in a very happy family to an extent, one that gave you a lot of good imprints. I'd love you to talk to that, because you also talk about you have an imprint around the scarcity of money.
So, yeah, I do feel like I was a very lucky person. I grew up with what I would consider a lot of safety, emotional safety in my house. So my parents were always like, you can go and be and do whoever you want to be in the world. There was a lot of love. There was a lot of safety. There was no not a lot, there was no anger, aggression, all that kind of stuff, you know. And I know from listening to thousands of people's stories, you know, that my upbringing was probably a very rare one in the sense that I felt very safe and secure in my family of origin, which is, you know, is a blessing, is a beautiful thing. And I also had, you know, a mum that was very aware and she was a very conscious human. And so often from a very young age would, you know, really get me to question what's going on in life. What am I making this mean? Where is this sitting for you? So even as a teenager, I was asking these bigger questions of what is this about for me and what am I learning here? So I do feel like I was really blessed with a really strong foundation into being curious and being aware. Yet, even amongst all that, there are still things that, you know, didn't serve me, like all families, because nothing is perfect. So the one around money was a big one, which I talk about in the book. You know, I grew up in a family where the belief system or the imprint was, you know, you have to work really, really, really hard just to earn enough money. Or even from my dad's side of the family, you know, they didn't grow up with very much money at all, and they had a belief system that people who had money were not very nice people. And that's what I heard often, that people have got a lot of money, well, you know, they're assholes, or, you know, they're, you know, we don't like them. And so again, these subtle imprints sit with you, and then you grow up to be an adult, and then these stories around money are the ones that often end up leading. So, you know, you have this belief that in order to earn money, I've got to work really, really hard. So, you know, not have any boundaries and put myself out there. And then equally at the same time, you don't want to earn too much money because then you don't want to be an asshole like everybody thinks you are. So these stories are often so subtle. And I know from working with a lot of people, these stories are very real for a lot of people, depending on that family of origin that they grew up in and their relationship to money. And that is also similar to things like success. It's also similar to things like self-care. You know, I didn't really have a great imprint around that. My mum was an amazing woman, but her whole story was very much about taking care of other people and putting everyone else's needs first. So that's what I watched. And then I became a mum, and then that felt very, very challenging because we know as a mother, if you don't have self-care, then often that doesn't go well. So these were the kind of subtle things that I began to see, the stories that were guiding how I was interacting with life, and then realizing they don't serve me and I want to change them. But the thing that I find is very interesting about a lot of this work is we unconsciously often stay loyal to our family of origin because it makes us feel like that's how we belong. So when we try and shift the needle a bit to be like, yeah, it's safe for me to earn lots of money, or I want to be a success, or I'm going to take care of my needs, sometimes we feel this real push-pull thing that goes on within us because we're often like, yeah, that's what I want, but my family over here, you know, what we do in our family is we struggle, or what we do in our family is we don't deal with any feelings, we just push them under the rug, or what we do in our family of origin is we just give to everybody all the time. So then when we're over here trying to take care of our needs or change that story, it can feel very, very challenging, and it's often where people get really stuck because they go, yeah, I want to change this, but then they realize that drawing back to the loyalty within the family and belonging is the thing that often keeps them there. And part of the work is learning to go, hey, you will always belong in your family, and it is okay to do it differently now. You know, that has served all the generations before us, but it doesn't need to be your story now.
It's interesting you say that because I feel like when I started really working on myself, it's a bizarre thing because you're showing up as the person that you have always wanted to be, but it can seem odd to your friends and family. It's like, who is this person?
Yeah.
They don't seem like the old person. Yes, you have your same values and things like that, but in a sense you've changed because for change to occur, you need to change. And that change can sometimes be so overwhelming for the actual person doing the work that they fall back in to what they've known and then they don't move forward, right?
Yeah.
So it's not like your family's going to leave you because you're showing up as a better person, but you can't be held down with the known, right? With the suffering mentality or whatever it is that you might have had, because that's what, as you mentioned, like families can do, or a negative view on money. To move forward, you need to change that. But it can be quite difficult for people because the familiar seems easier, even if it is one of suffering and it's darker. It's harder to be happier and let go of these, you know, emotional bonds that we have with people that aren't serving us. So it's easier to sit sometimes in the negativity.
Yeah, totally. I talk about this in the book about these kind of different levels of consciousness that I think we all have the opportunity to move through. And I think we all kind of start at a place where and we could refer to this as like the unconscious way of thinking, where we believe that we're all about our bank accounts, the way we look, material possessions. You know, we base our self-worth on all the things that society says are really important. And often at this level of consciousness, you know, we gossip about people, we judge a lot, we often don't have good boundaries. You know, we are, you know, kind of sitting in those places where we're perhaps not being the true version of ourselves. And the majority of the world sits in this place, right? And that's just because we're a product of the world that we've grown up in. But then often what happens is we have some form of crisis that goes on. So we get fired from a job, our partner leaves, you know, maybe we get sick, we have the death of a loved one, something that kind of shakes us to our core, right? That makes you go, what is this all about? You know, where we are invited to lean in to do the work, which is really about, well, who am I and where do I want to be? And we kind of shift from that unconscious way of being into more of a working with our subconscious patterning, where what we're doing is we're sitting there and we actually start having all those thoughts of like, well, who am I and who do I want to be in the world? And that is where we start, you know, exploring meditation or breath work, or we start, you know, researching other stuff. And we start, I think, realizing that there is more to it than just this material way of being. And I think what we often do then is we open ourselves up to, I guess, being connected with the deeper version of who we are. And yet when we do this work, it is often feels very lonely because you're usually doing it on your own, right? Because it is all an internal journey into who am I and who do I want to be in the world. And this is where we start to take care of ourselves. This is where we start to have better boundaries. This is where we start to go, you know what, I don't want to go and catch up with those people and just gossip about others. It doesn't feel good, right? And then what happens is exactly what you say is, as we are shifting and changing, everybody over here, who is not wrong, they're just doing what they're doing, kind of looks at us and goes, what are you doing? Like, why are you going to that retreat thing? Or why are you doing, you know, this work? And why aren't you drinking with us anymore? All that kind of stuff. And often they kind of try and pull us back into it because, you know, as we shift and change, often it can be a bit of a mirror to them that they're not changing and shifting. And so we don't like that. So we're like, we're going to pull you back in here. And so we kind of get pulled back in for a bit. And then we're like, it doesn't feel good. And then we kind of shift out again. So we do this kind of swinging thing for a bit, I think, until we then reach a point where we can move into this third level of consciousness, which is really where we are living life from our most authentic center. And that is where we do have excellent boundaries and good self-care. It's where we realize that we are not our bodies or, you know, how much money we earn. You know, we want to be of service to the world. We realize that we are deeply connected to ourselves and to whatever else perhaps is out there, and where we can sit in a place where we don't judge. You know, we can look at these other places and go, they're not wrong. They are just people doing the best that they can with what they've got. There's no wrong or right within it. But we start to live our lives from a place where we feel deeply attuned to who we are. And I really do believe that, you know, that is kind of the work, or that's where we want to get to the place of living life from a way where we are really deeply listening to ourselves and living that authentic truth. And so we can hang out there for a bit. But here's the thing, I often joke, you know, we can be there and we're like, yes, life is flowing the way I want. And then we just go hang out with our family for a weekend. And then we're like, oh, boom, I'm right back over here again. And the beautiful thing is that we can swing between these kind of columns, and it's not right or wrong. But I think each time we kind of swing back, it helps us to go, where do I want to be? And, you know, I really do feel like the work of adulthood is so much about learning to come home to ourselves. It is so much about understanding these patterns, these imprints, these stories, working through them, not making anyone wrong, doing our healing work, all those really big things, so that we can actually live a life where we feel empowered, where we feel connected to our truth, where we're actually listening to our intuition, and we're actually living a life of beauty that we want, because I do believe that can exist. But we often have to do the work over here in order to get there.
Oh, yeah. And it's an ongoing process.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, I have done the work for many years, and there'll be points where everything's running so smoothly, and then bang, because that's life, right?
Yeah.
And then you go back and you keep doing the work,
Yeah.
and it can be harder and there can be tricky moments, but you have that toolbox with you to be able to propel yourself forward and not fall down as much as what you may have.
Yeah.
It's funny you say the thing about, think you've done the work and then you spend time with your family. It's like the Ram Dass quote,
Yeah.
you think you're enlightened and then go
Yeah.
spend a weekend with your family.
Yeah, totally.
And it just pulls us back to our youth, and we almost start acting like the 16-year-old child. It's such a
100%.
weird thing.
Yeah.
I want to ask you, circle back to the money thing, because you tell in your book a story about having a fight with your husband one night over financial stress, which I think a lot of probably majority of people listening to this podcast would be able to relate to that. Talk to us about that and how you work through that.
Yeah. So I've been with my husband for like 25 plus years now, and by all accounts, we've had a really beautiful marriage. It's, we're very aligned. There's a lot of flow, but the only thing that we really used to fight about was money. And when you kind of understand the imprints, I was coming to the relationship with this imprint, which was all about you must work really, really hard just to have enough, and then you don't really want too much because, then that feels dangerous. So I had a real lack mentality. And then my husband had a story that he brought to our relationship, and his parents were immigrants. They came to Australia with nothing, and they've lived a life where they're like, let's just live beyond our means because we're so lucky to do it, right? Which is what served them. So his belief system around money was you just spend whatever you've got, don't worry about it. So
Oh my God.
together, it was not good, right? Together, it was just like this tension that often went on, and it was so clearly both our imprints surfacing and coming together. And even though we were parents with 3 kids, this is where we would clash. And so one day we're having this argument in the kitchen about money, and it was about spending on something and whatever. I don't even know what it was about, but it was getting really heated. And then I remember just stopping and thinking, this is not going anywhere good. And I just looked at him and I asked him the question. I was like, how old are you right now? And he knew what I was talking about because he just kind of stopped and he said, I'm 12 or something like that. And he said to me, how old are you? And I'm like, I'm 4. And what I meant by that question in that moment was, who is actually having this conversation right now? Because it was not the adult versions of us. The adult versions of us would be able to sit there and listen to each other, would be able to go, okay, I can see that we've got some tension stuff here. How do we work through it? But really what we were doing in those heated moments is it's like we were 2 kids battling it out. And so when I asked him, how old are you right now? He said, I'm 12, 13. And I said to him, what's going on for you? And he said, I feel like the 13-year-old kid who doesn't know what to do, right? I need a guide. I need a mentor. I feel like I'm making it up. And then he's like, what's happening for you? And I was like, I feel like I'm the 4-year-old who's really scared, who's trying to fix everything. That was one of the roles I often played in my family. I just want to make it all okay for everybody. And so in that moment, what was happening is the younger versions of us were kind of having this battle. And whenever those younger parts of us turn up, we often are not going to get the results that we want because the wounded parts of us are turning up and they're often saying, this is dangerous. Let's be really careful. Let's defend at all costs. Let's make the other person wrong. We have to try and protect this belief system or story that we've got going on. But when we could actually just identify, he's 12, I'm 4, we kind of just dropped for the moment. We kind of moved back into our hearts. And I just acknowledge, you're really scared. And he's like, yeah, I'm totally scared. And I said, I'm scared too. And so what we're doing right now is we're trying really, really hard to try and keep ourselves safe because that's what we're always doing. We're always coming from protection. And so from that moment, we could just sit down and go, okay, what are the stories that are going on here and what do we need to work with to change them? And that is where we really began to shift our stories and imprints around money and how we can make it safe. So I had to take this story from you must work hard at all costs just to have enough to a story that said, work can be enjoyable and I can earn lots of money doing stuff that I love, as opposed to, you've just got to work really, really, really hard. So I was like, I want my new imprint to be this. I want my new imprint to be a story that says money is enjoyable and it's fun and it's something that is easy to play with, right? Instead of fear, lack, really hard. And so what I began to do is I began to just say, well, if this was an imprint, which is just a story that you take on board, well, I'm going to write a different story. And so every morning I would wake up And I would imagine, okay, if I have the opportunity right now to create a different story, what do I want that story to be? And I would almost imagine my parents standing in front of me with a magic wand saying, right, money is fun. And you don't have to work so hard for it, and rest is good. And I just started playing with the idea of, if I could write the script, which we all can do, what would I want the script to say? So every morning I would just reinforce that. This is the new story I've got. And then I would just start to look for evidence that that was possible. Someone might pay me an extra $5 and I'd be like, oh, look at that, it's working. There's, an extra $5 came into my world. Or I started small with playing the game of shifting this story, to then it moved to being one where I was getting paid really well and I didn't have to work hard. And I began to see that there was a different way that we could actually do it, because the more we start to see evidence for it, the more we start to shift our thinking, exactly like what you said earlier on, we actually then start to look for the evidence that it's possible instead of the evidence that it's not. So it became a beautiful game changer for us within it. And I think not just the shifting of that story in the imprint, but also being aware that so often it's the younger parts of us that are turning up in relationships. I mean, we're all adults, but I really think we're probably just wounded kids walking around in adult bodies, bumping up against each other. And we do that a lot in our intimate relationships, and money is one of those topics that often is very fiery, but it's also, that turns up in parenting all the time. It turns up in in-laws and family. It turns up with just even emotionally how we connect and intimacy. These stories and imprints are often within us and the ones that are calling the shots. And I think the invitation is to go, is that actually who I want to be, and who's here in this moment? And I think that even that line, who's here right now, is something I ask myself often, particularly if I feel off my center or I feel triggered about something. The first thing I'll often say to myself is, who's here right now? And what I mean by that is, which part of me? Is this like 4-year-old me? Is this like the teenage me? Or is this the adult embodied me that's actually like, there's something happening here. I need to set a boundary, or I need to speak up about something. But I think in asking ourselves often who's here, we get to tune in with, is this the adult me that can stay grounded and be aware and have these conversations? Or are these like younger parts of me that are just protecting and trying to defend, a fear or a belief system or a trauma, that may be sitting there?
As parents who, a lot of would be listening, who obviously have kids, and hearing about imprints, wanting to make sure that their kids grow up with the best imprints that they can, I wonder, when is the point where you stop controlling so much and give your kids freedom, but then, not too much freedom that they're out of control kind of thing? And I know that there's, dependent on the age of your child, it's very different. You're not going to give a 2-year-old all the freedom, because then they would injure themselves and not know what they're doing. But then also when they get to like 10, 11, 12, they're starting to become, adolescents to teenagers. It's, that's where my kids are at now. It's that fine line that you want to help them, but you don't want to over-help them.
Yeah.
What do you suggest?
Well, I think firstly, to just reassure everybody, we're never going to get it all right. And one of the things I talk about in the book, and that's something that is a really good motivation to change, is to think about, what imprints are you giving your kids? Because a lot of adults, sometimes they don't want to do the work, and we don't want to look at the past, and, we have traumas and we have stories, and I totally get it. Not everybody wants to go there. But we have to be aware that our children are watching, and we are forming the imprints for them in their life right now. And we're not, we don't have to get it perfect, right? Because there is no perfect. We can do something that we think is like, this is really great modeling, and our children perceive it in a completely different way, right? So there's no perfect, you can't get it right. But what we want to be doing, and I think this is what is really good motivation for people to change, is to be like, what are the stories you want your children to carry forward? And our kids can't be what they can't see, right? So if we want our children to be empathetic and kind, then are we modeling that? If we want our children to take risks and be brave, do we show them what that looks like? If we want our children to know how to navigate their big feelings and anger, are we modeling healthy ways to do that? Like, these are all the imprints that we're doing, right? So one of the first things we need to often do is be looking at, well, what are we actually modeling in our family of origin? What are our values here? What do we want our kids to carry forward? And we have to often start doing that. But then I also think we look at is that we are our children's guides, right? Like, so what I've written about in this book and what most of the work I do with adults these days is going back to their childhood and seeing the pieces and the parts that didn't serve them, and then connecting the stories that they made it mean, and then how that works in their life right now. So we have this incredible opportunity right now to think about, how do we model to our children, how to be a really compassionate, kind citizen of this earth, right? That is really the work that we're doing in raising these kids. And it starts by us living it, because our kids have to often see it modeled. We can't say to them, go take risks, if we never ever get off the couch, right? We can't say to them, you have to treat your body well, but, we then just fill ourselves up with, crappy stuff, right? Our kids are always going to watch what it is that we're doing. So I think the first piece is that we model that, or we do the best we can to show them what it is. But then it gets to a point, right, where we always have to trust our children's journey. From the moment they are born, they are going to be their own being. And yes, they are going to be guided by, what happens in our houses and how we are and our connection and attunement and attachment and all those things. Yes, that absolutely is going to guide them. But I think a beautiful thing to keep in the back of our mind is that our job when raising children is not to make them conform into an ideal of what we think. We can guide them, we can show them the way, we can give them these beautiful imprints. But ultimately, for me, what I believe is that our children need to be the full expression of themselves. They need to be their own beautiful, unique being. And how do we do that? Well, we attune to them, we attach to them, we guide them, we show them, this is how we say thank you to another person, and this is how we take care of our bodies, and this is what is really respectful as a human. We have to show them those things. But then we have to allow them to be who they need to be. And part of the trickiness of that is checking our own belief systems around what we think it should look like. The amount of parents I've worked with whose kids, maybe they aren't really that great academically, but maybe they're an amazing athlete or a brilliant artist, but the parent in their mind has got an imprint and a story that says, no, success equals academic grades, right? You must finish school, you must do this. And the rub starts to happen because the child's like, I don't care about that. What I want to do is kick a soccer ball, right? Or I don't care about that because music is my jam. And so often what happens is it's inviting us to look at, what are my stories that I'm taking on from my family of origin, or what society tells me it should be, and do we need to challenge those? So parenting is always about often pushing up against our belief systems and ideals of what we think, a healthy, good child should look like. And yes, we want our kids to be healthy and we want them to be good. But for me, the goal is helping our children to stay deeply connected to themselves. How do we help them do that? Well, we do that with ourselves, but also, we meet them where they're at. We are willing to lean into the uncomfortableness to see their magic and who they're meant to be.
It's interesting because I think a lot of the landscape has changed now. Social media is a big part of it, and especially with kids where they're getting it so young. And as you know, the laws are changing here at the end of the year. And I did an episode on this. I mean, they'll only change if the parents change, really, because a lot of parents say they care, but it's easier just to allow them to have social media, and then, all the other kids feel left out because their friends have it. So then the parents give in because they don't want their kid to feel left out. And it's this like vicious cycle. Yeah. But a lot of people, I wanted to ask you about this because I've had it from a lot of parents asking me this question. And I have experienced it myself, where your child has a device, right? And with my kids, we make them sleep with their devices like in another room. So they're in the devices are in the kitchen. They're nowhere near their bedroom. And I think there was one night, we're actually on holidays, where I woke up because I heard my 12-year-old talking at 4 a.m.
Oh, gosh.
And I thought, oh, my God, who is he talking to? It's 4 a.m. And people had called him and they were playing games and doing God knows what, right?
Yeah.
So then the next day, well, I think my husband went in and actually spoke to him. But, basically I said the next day, who are you talking to? And he's like, oh, these people called. And I'm like, why are they calling you at this time in the morning? Like, I don't think they had gone to sleep. It wasn't like they woke up early. And their parents had no idea that they were on these devices. And my friend was telling me a story about how they got his son an iPad. I think his son's like about 9 or 10. And they didn't want him to have it in his room at night time. So my friend was charging it next to his bed. He said a 10-year-old was getting messages from other kids at 11:30 at night. Their iPad's like flashing up. He goes, I only know because I was charging it. I had to turn it the other way because it was irritating me. I'm about to go to sleep. And that's when like the parents are completely losing control.
Yeah.
And they're allowing their kids to have these devices in their room, not realizing that they're playing with them till God knows what time in the morning, and these kids should be sleeping. What kind of things do you recommend as far as like boundaries with those sort of things?
I think this is a really tricky space because we don't have enough evidence yet to see the impact of this, right? And technology is amazing, and the internet came in and all these things happened, and I think it'll be in years to come that we'll look back and go, oof, what happened in our society and our culture at that time when we brought that in. Now, from my experience and what I've watched, what happened or what has happened is a great deal of disconnection. And we have to look at where is that disconnection started from. And the disconnection started from, I think, the fact that we are all living a pretty stressed life at the moment, right? So I look at parents and we can go, yeah, that's not ideal. But I also have a lot of compassion and empathy that when you are stressed and you're juggling work and all the things, if your kid is quiet and playing on their iPad, then that makes your life a bit easier, right? So I get it. I get that is on some level, it's a great babysitter, right? That has kind of come in. Also, too, how addicted we are to technology, right? Our children are watching us again, and we are there constantly scrolling or looking. And yes, sometimes we have to do it for work and all those kind of things, but we are more than ever sitting there with our heads down looking at this technology. So our kids are watching. Oh, yeah, that's what we do. So then I think we have this perfect storm of where we have stressed parents who are perhaps disconnected from themselves, not only just from, technology, but also from the amount of stresses that we've got going on. And we're not necessarily taking care of our needs, and we're not necessarily slowing down. And the world is telling us to move faster and keep going and bigger and better and all that kind of stuff. So we're doing this hustle, trying to keep up with it all. And then when we have children on top of that require connection and time and presence and all those kind of things, and if we're really short of that and we don't have anything to give, then, technology is a great answer for them to do it. So I get why it is where it is, right? And I also think then the other issue that pops up is that parents are not so great at boundaries these days, because often when we set boundaries and we say, no, you can't be on the iPad, or no, we're turning it off now, children who have a big backpack full of feelings, which a lot of them do because they're carrying their own stresses, well, they push up against that no, and then they have an almighty meltdown. And then the parent's like, I don't have capacity to deal with that, so just take the iPad. And then what we do is we blame technology a lot. And yes, technology has a part to play in that. But I also feel that perhaps as a culture, our lack of connection and being able to be with feelings is contributing to the massive disconnection. Because when we look at children, their innate nature is to be connected to us. They want to be connected. They want to play. They want to laugh. They want to snuggle. Like they want to feel connected to us. But if we're, as the adults, not able to be connected, then our children are going to have to learn how to numb those feelings. And so technology is the perfect place. They get to just repress what's going on. And so then that's why it becomes quite addictive in nature, because they're just like, well, every time I get upset, I can just play this and I don't have to feel, which is what we do as adults as well, right? So I think it's all going on everywhere. And I think the answer, I don't have the grand answer, but I think one of the answers that we need to do is we need to put down our technology and we need to connect more. And we have to make that a priority, particularly in families, so that we do have those rules that phones go away at 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock and it's a non-negotiable. Like that is what's happening. You can get those boxes you can put them in and all that kind of stuff so the kids can't access it. And then we focus on connection, because our kids, they're little for such a short amount of time. They really are. And what we want to do ideally is we want to be able to bring as much connection, safety, attunement to our kids before they reach those teenage years. Because yes, as they become teenagers, they are more than likely going to have a phone and they are going to be exposed to the world. And we want to make sure that our connection with them is solid before they get to that point, so that they have an inbuilt imprint that says connection with a person feels better than just me looking at my phone, right? Because when they know how good it feels to laugh with someone, to be with them, that beautiful, authentic connection, there is nothing like that. That the dopamine release, the oxytocin we get when we do that is far greater than the little hit we might get if someone likes our photo on Instagram. So we want our children to know that that is the baseline. And when they have, I believe, that baseline of connection, they may still kind of, fall into wanting to check out on social media and screens and all that kind of stuff. But they know that connection actually does feel better. And I feel like, phones and technology are not going away. They're not. We have to learn how to live with them. And like most things, when things come in, they swing too far in the other one direction, and then we have to kind of taper it back a little bit, which I think is what's happening now. We're seeing it with a lot of things. We're kind of like, whoa, that's a lot. Let's kind of bring it back. And for me, we want to bring as much connection and more connection than what we're doing when, our kids are checking out on screens.
Going back to the idea of wanting to instill good values, or not just values, stories in your children's minds about their self-worth, how do we actually do that?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a few things. The first is, I really do believe this is kind of the core piece, is that we want our children to know that they are lovable no matter what. So again, I think it comes back to the culture and society we've grown up in, really from that behaviourism place that has often told children, we love you when you're good, and when you're bad, we're going to ignore you, or we're going to turn away, or we're going to make you feel even worse in order to do better, right? Which is really that big punishment thing that we've been a big part of. And really what that often sets up in a child is, I'm only lovable when you approve of me. Now that becomes a really tricky point, because when a child has been sent to their room or they're being punished for something, and again, this is a bigger conversation, because I know people are like, but they need guidelines. Yes, they do. And they need boundaries, right? So please, I get that. But often what happens is when we punish children particularly, or we make them bad or wrong for something, the narrative often isn't, it becomes something like this, not I've done something wrong, but I am wrong. So often what happens is when we are punishing children a lot, when we are turning away from them, when they're angry and they're upset, instead of being able to sit in the fire with them, we are often giving them a message that says, you're not lovable, right? Because you have to behave and be good in order for me to love you. And, working with so many adults over the years, I say the same thing to them. When you were 4 and you were angry and you were upset because your brother broke your truck, or, you wanted more ice cream or whatever it was, and you were so mad and you were so upset, what did you want from your parent in that moment? Now, every adult says the same thing. I wanted them to get down on my level and look me in the eye and say, I'm here with you. I get it. And let it out. And I love you no matter what. Right? But most of us didn't get that. And it wasn't because our parents were just doing the best job they knew how, right? Always. But often what happens is, we got shut down, or maybe we got smacked, or maybe we got yelled at, or whatever it was. And we learnt that I have to be good in order to be loved. So then that often creates a story that says, well, if people don't approve of me, then I'm not okay. So when we're looking at how do we help children to have robust self-worth, well, firstly, it has to start with how we respond to them in the tricky times. How do we as adults, are we able to sit in the uncomfortableness with them? And again, I have a lot of compassion, because it's not easy, because most of us have never had that done to them, to ourselves. So it's very hard to give something to our children that we haven't had an experience of. And so that's why we have to keep doing this work to learn how to be with the uncomfortable. So as we learn to be with the uncomfortable with our children, we are letting them know, hey, I see you. Even when you're angry, you know, I'm not going to let you hurt your brother, and I'm not going to let you throw those things, but I'm here with you. And anger's not wrong, but the way we express it is really important. Or your tears are very welcome. You know, I'm going to be able to sit here and help you express and move through what's going on. When we're able to do those things, we're setting up an imprint in our kids that says, hey, I love you, even when you're messy, even when you're angry, even when you're fabulous, even when you're happy, right? So my love is not conditional. So that, I think, is the first place we set it up. The second thing, I think, really around self-worth, you know, there's all those beautiful things we can celebrate, you know, them working hard. We can celebrate, you know, when they've overcome something tricky. All that beautiful stuff really reinforces to them, hey, you know, I can see you and I see your challenges, and helps build that beautiful resilience. But I think one of the things that I have found over the years, and I'm sure there's science to back it up somewhere, but if as the adults in a child's life, if we have a really harsh inner critic, if we have a lot of negative self-talk, our kids can often carry that forward without us even saying it out loud. So I have seen many parents who've come to me in the past saying, my child, you know, thinks badly of themselves, and they say they're hopeless and they're stupid. And I'm like, okay. And we talk about what might be going on in their world. And then I say to the adult, and what's your inner voice like? And they're like, oh yeah, it's terrible. You know, I'm always beating myself up. And they're like, but I never say it out loud. And I'm like, you kind of don't even have to. You know, our kids often pick that up. And so what do we do with that? Well, for me, again, the journey is one of compassion and coming home to loving ourselves and doing the healing work for ourselves around our inner voices and our harsh talk, and healing that. The more love and compassion we can have for ourselves as the adult, not only does it make us more compassionate with our children and everyone else, but it's like that is the essence that's followed through. So when we say, how do we help our children? Well, yes, we can do all the beautiful practical things here, but I often think, you know, the internal voice we have of the adult is equally as important.
You have this beautiful quote in your book. I've heard it before. In your book, you reference it from Tiny Buddha, and it says, which is a website, when you keep criticizing your kids, they don't stop loving you, they stop loving themselves.
Yeah.
I mean, that's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
But very true.
Yeah.
Because we will pick at our kids sometimes because we want them to be better.
Yeah.
And the fact is, that will just make them so hard on themselves, but it won't make them stop loving us. And we don't want that. No one wants that.
Of course we don't. And I think we have to remember, particularly something like parenting, is that we all love our children, right? And we all want them to succeed and be the best version of themselves. But we often have to keep ourselves in check around, if my child is a success, does that mean that I'm a success as a parent? Because sometimes that's what drives us, you know, and we're all very well meaning. Of course, we want our children to have their best lives, but there is a time and a place where we have to actually stand and sit back and just be that really anchored presence in their lives without pushing the agenda. You know, again, anybody that got pushed as a kid, whether it was sport or music or academics, that kind of stuff, yes, it may have helped them succeed, but often there is a double-edged sword that goes with it. And there's a way that we can balance that well. You know, I often come back to going, and I've said this to my kids who are now adults, I just want you to be the best version of you. And how do I support you to be that? So it would be like, what do you love? What do I need to know about you? What would support look like for you? You know, you're about to do this tricky thing. What would you need from me to help you? Or what can I do in this moment that's not going to make it any worse? Like, you know, these are the kind of the conversations sometimes we want to have with our kids, to go, I want you to follow your path. And I think sometimes the sticky point as a parent is that we are influenced by what society says is success. And I think that is sometimes where it gets messy, because we've got these voices. Maybe it's our parents, it's, you know, the generations before us, maybe it's society. And then we're like, oh my God, if my child doesn't do this, they're not going to be that. And that's sometimes where I think it can get a little bit messy.
Lael, what is some of the best advice that you have ever been given?
Oh, that's a very good question. I think maybe just because this advice has been really relevant to me in the last little bit, probably connected to this book, is really about who's turning up in these moments. Is this your ego that wants it to be this way, or is that the truth of you? And so the advice, it actually came through my mum. I was in the middle of battling with something, and she said something really simple like, and maybe it just is. And it was just in that moment that I was like, oh yeah, I'm making this a whole thing, right? Because that's my ego, and that's because I think it should be this way. And what if it just is? And we then had a conversation. She was talking to me really about how, our ego thinks it should be that way because, I want it to be seen like this, or it's got to, people will have to talk about it in this way. And really, that's actually not what it's about. What it's about is coming back to your essence and who you are, and actually going, maybe it just is that way, and you actually know the truth of you, and that's all that really matters. I think at the end of the day, I often keep coming back to this as a bit of a practice is, am I staying connected to the truth of who I am, right? Or am I getting sucked up in the world that says it should be this and it's got to be like that, and losing my center to all the outside influences? And this is like many great, incredible spiritual leaders who have walked the path often all say this. Always the work is internal, and it is always usually very quiet. And yet we get sucked up into this world here. And my mum saying to me, and maybe it just is, just has made me go, oh yeah, come back here. It's like it's humbling. It's like the most like, oh God, yeah, okay, that is the truth within it. But you kind of have to go all the messy bits first until you can get to that bit.
Yeah, I totally agree. Someone often says that to me when I've made stories about God knows what leading to this and that, and like maybe that it just is what it is. There isn't that big story that revolves around it, and it is very grounding. You're like, maybe you're right. What is your favorite prayer or saying or mantra?
One that I've worked with a lot in the last maybe 8-9 years is actually, and I do this often when I wake up in the morning, I say two things. I say, remember who you are and show me where you need me. And for me, that is really about remember the essence of yourself. You're not how you look, you're not your bank account, you're not all these things that you do. Yes, it's amazing, but actually the essence of yourself. Like remember that, the stillness, the quiet. And then the second part of show me where you need me is I feel like I'm at this place in my life where I'm like, how can I serve others? Because that's really, again, that is so much of the beauty of like, how can I help others come home to themselves, and I think that show me where you need me is a bit of a mantra I say most mornings to just kind of put it out there to the world to go, show me where I'm meant to go next, show me who I can help, show me what I can do to make this world a better place.
Beautiful. What's been your most mystical experience?
I think I shared this with you when I came on last time about having a kind of really enlightened experience. I just had this really big awakening, and I spent 3 days in this really altered state.
Oh, that's right. You tell us again.
Yeah, it really was literally a average, I don't know, Tuesday or something. I had this massage that was amazing. Yes. And then I just kind of left that massage and I just felt the most extraordinary sense of expansion that I've ever felt in my life. I could not wipe the smile off my face. I just felt that everything was love. I mean, if you had looked at me, you would have thought I was high or something because I was just like, and the feeling was there was just no fear at all. And that's the thing that I couldn't shake, and I still haven't been able to. The feeling I had in my being and my body was that everything was exactly as it needed to be. There was no fear. I felt nothing but love. It was like everything that we get caught up in just faded away. I just felt in this state of, oh, this is actually what it's meant to be about as a human. And everything was completely conscious. So even going and making a cup of tea was this like amazing experience. I remember just stirring the tea going, wow, there was this level of presence that I've never had before. And I'm a usually fast moving person, but it was like this deep connectedness to myself and to life. it was amazing. Like I almost feel teary talking about it because it kind of lasted for about 3 or so days and then it kind of faded. And since then, you know, I've done a lot more research on it and spoken to other people who've had similar experiences like that. It was almost like a taste of this is what it is all about. And
It's like you lifted the veil.
it was totally that. And sometimes I will feel that again, whether I'm in deep meditation or in nature. And it was like it was a little gift to say, this is actually what we're meant to be here for. And remember that in your being, in your body. I don't know. It's really hard to put into words. And I remember sharing it last time on the podcast and you said to me, I've had other people say that same story.
Yeah.
And it made me go, oh,
Oneness.
okay, good. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm not so weird. Yeah, it was extraordinary. It's something I would hope everybody in their lifetime gets to experience.
Did you try and go back to the massage therapist? to
Yes,
get
I
it done
did.
again?
I messaged her and I was like, I don't know what is going on with you, but like, you know, yeah, I did, but it never quite happened.
I know when we try and chase it, it never happens.
And I think that's the thing I learned. It was like a gift to go, this is actually what it's about, but you can't chase it again. It just is. And other people I've spoken to have said similar things that it just happened in the most random of ways where all of a sudden they were like, whoa, this is actually what it's all about. This is the truth of who we are. And I feel like, you know, even with this book, yes, it's just a stepping stone on the ladder of us becoming more aware and more conscious as humans. And I hope that feeling, that expansion, if that is the truth of who we are, that maybe one day we will get there.
I hope so too. And our final question, what is a life of greatness to you?
For me, a life of greatness is the stillness. It is the deep connection to myself. It is being with those that I love. It is being of service to others, you know, not in a way that sacrifices myself, but I feel like if I have an opportunity or a platform to help people know themselves better, then that to me feels like I'm so lucky to be here doing the work that I do.
Lael, thank you for your new book, Own Your Own Story. You can find it at all good bookstores. Thank you for being you, beautiful lady, and thank you for the conversation today.
Thanks for having me.